Morning, everybody. So next week we will be starting floor activity. So we're going to be getting into the part of the session where we should have floor activity nearly every day. We have a number of bills that I anticipate being voted out of rules here within the next hour or two, and that will position us to start taking up bills on the floor next week. Obviously, we're all hoping that the Kansas City Chiefs will be winning the Super Bowl on Sunday, and in the event that that happens, which it will happen, we will have a technical session the day of the parade. So if we have members that want to attend to celebrate the Chiefs, celebrate Kansas City and the state and all the accomplishments, they will have the opportunity to do that. But then committees, if they so choose, can still meet and conduct business if that needs to happen. So that's the rundown from a 10,000-foot view of what next week is going to look like. With that, any questions?
So a lot of people who I've talked to in the hallways are saying this rhythm of this session feels much more like past year before the disruptions and factionalism over in the Missouri Senate. Are you all satisfied with the pace of this year's session?
Yeah, I mean, overall, I'd say yes. I think we're off to a good start. Obviously, committees have been working on a lot of legislation. The Senate has been working on bills and perfecting them on the floor this week, which I think gives a lot of us hope that things are going to be different this year, that we're going to have more productivity. I think we have a really nice dynamic this year with a governor and House leadership and Senate leadership that have similar priorities and overall get along and work well together. So I think that's one of the reasons that we're off to a better start and hopefully have a good session ahead of us.
Are you at all afraid that anything like factionalism will surface here in the House?
You know, I think there's always a chance of that. I'm not going to say that it's not going to happen. When you have 163 members that represent every corner of the state, you're going to have diverging viewpoints within the caucuses, both on the Republican side and the Democrat side. So I'm sure that we are going to have times where we have differences of opinion. But I think on the House side, we are able to manage that. We're able to still work together, and we're able to still function even when we have internal disagreements where they don't just shut down our ability to function.
Say that the SAFETY Act, it was to take away, repeal the expiration date to sunset, was in committee this week, and it was a 7-hour hearing. Would you say that's a priority of Republicans this year, or why get that across the finish line when the sunset doesn't expire for 2-3 more years?
Sure. So I'd say the answer is yes. That's been a priority for us as House Republicans for a while. And I think as far as why we'd want to do it now versus later, you never know what the future holds. As we know, the Senate has had lots of dysfunction over the past 4, 5, 6 years. It seems that they're working together well now, but going into next year, it's an election year. Then after that, you have a very different makeup of the Senate, and we don't know what that looks like. So I think for us, we recognize that since that is something we want to prioritize, that is something that we want to work on, doing it now in this year where things seem to be running a little smoothly makes a lot of sense.
The border war law that Missouri signed in 2019 to stop the incentive war in Kansas, that expires in August. Is that something that you think should be extended this year?
Yes, absolutely.
In what, like, are you going to get any pushback, considering what Kansas did last year, trying to take the Chiefs and Royals?
I mean, there's always frustration on our side when any state is trying to steal our professional sports teams that we love and cheer for. At the same time, I do think we all recognize that border war doesn't make sense for any state. It didn't make sense for Missouri. It didn't make sense for Kansas. No one was doing better economically. It was just costing everybody a whole lot of money, and no one was really doing better. It just seemed kind of dumb from both sides. So I think, yes, we want to make sure that the Chiefs and Royals stay in Missouri. At the same time, I see that as maybe a separate issue than the overall border war that we've had between the two states. And we don't want to get back in that sort of fight where we're having to spend a lot of taxpayer dollars, tax credits, things of that nature to keep businesses. Kansas is trying to do the same. It just doesn't make sense from a budgetary perspective, and you're not seeing overall increases in economic growth, production, any of that kind of thing for either state.
What about St. Louis City department, is that one of the first ones on deck for next week, or is there still conversation going on?
That will likely not be on the floor next week. So it was in committee this morning. A second committee hearing was held on that bill. Some additional work was done. So that will still need to go through the process, and I don't anticipate that being ready for the floor next week.
You guys had the first big abortion Amendment 3 related hearing this week. I noticed during those discussions there were some arguments about Amendment 3 performing better in bigger cities than in rural parts of the state. Is amending the IP process going to be a priority for you guys? I just kind of noticed that kept coming up during that hearing.
So I think there's always going to be interest within the ranks of House Republicans to make adjustments to that IP process. As far as whether that ends up being one of the priority bills this session, I can't say today that that's going to be a top priority. I do think that that's something we're always going to continue to look at. We have a lot of concerns over the IP process, but we do have some other issues that we need to work on first, probably. And I think the focus is going to be working on those issues first, prioritizing those, and then continuing that discussion on IP. That's something we're going to continue to work through, but as you all know from covering the House longer than I've been here, we've passed bills out of the House every single year, multiple different topics, changing that process in different ways, and none of those have been able to make their way through the Senate. So it wouldn't surprise me if we do eventually pass some legislation out of the House on that issue, but I'm not entirely sure what the path looks like on the Senate side, to be honest. No.
Does that look more like a congressional district proposal? I know that was debated last year. Do you have any idea of what that would look like?
You know, I think at this point, all options are on the table as far as I'm concerned, whether you're looking at something like congressional districts or just increasing the threshold statewide. I don't know that we have settled on a specific proposal this year. Obviously, we've had an election since the previous session. We have a different House, a different Senate. So the views of where the body is on that may have shifted a little bit, but to be honest, I haven't done a poll of the House or the Senate to figure out where people are exactly what they think is the best option. So I think probably both of those options and maybe others are under consideration, but we haven't landed on this is the bill that we want to pass as House Republicans.
House Commerce Committee has held some hearings on minimum wage legislation, and of course we just had a vote on minimum wage in November. Anything on Amendment 3 has to go back to voters if you want to change any of the terms there, but minimum wage doesn't have to. Should people be skeptical of the legislature when they're going to come back and change something we just voted on statutorily, and the reason people have been going to the Constitution is to prevent that? How does it look if the legislature changes the terms of the minimum wage?
Yeah, and I am sympathetic with those concerns. At the same time, we've had nothing but an outpouring of concern from our business community here in the state, particularly our small business community. With our big businesses, they don't have any problem paying the higher wages, doing the enhanced benefits that Proposition A required, but this has a highly negative effect potentially on our small businesses that don't have those same dollars, that don't have those same resources as the big companies. So we are very concerned about protecting small businesses in the state of Missouri. We as House Republicans prioritize that. So we're looking at multiple options. As you know, there's multiple bills working their way through the process. I don't know that we've settled yet on any one particular package there either, but we do want to make sure that our small businesses are protected and that we're not having we're not seeing small businesses shut down as a result of Proposition A.
What about the idea that voters can rely on that they vote on something and it stays in place?
Yeah, and I mean, at the same time as they're doing that, they're also electing us as House Republicans, and we stand for small businesses, we stand for economic growth. So, we've made our position on that clear where we are, and we have an interesting dynamic where they're electing Republicans that are in favor of business. We're in favor of small business. So we've made our position on that clear.
So the state has launched a website on government efficiency. Are there any other efforts that the House is considering on government efficiency and shrinking government?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. So we have our own committee on downsizing state government. They'll be hearing a number of bills on all aspects of that, whether you're looking at trying to clean up the budget, whether you're looking at deregulating certain areas where we have excessive regulations in place. So I think we have a number of legislative items going through that are in that space. And then, of course, Budget Committee is having hearings now. The departments are in presenting their budget. Our members from both sides of the aisle are having the opportunity to really inquire of those departments to figure out if they're spending money, if they're using taxpayer dollars in the best way possible. And of course, we are extremely concerned about making sure that taxpayer dollars are being spent wisely.
Yesterday, we had President Trump sign an executive order that had to do with pretty much no men and women's sports. So why does the State House need to go back and revisit that, even though there's that expiration date? Yesterday, we saw an executive order signed by the President.
You know, there's a few reasons. I think one is executive orders are always legally precarious. So I will expect nothing but many court challenges to that executive order, and I don't know which way the courts are going to rule. I imagine that will ultimately end up in the Supreme Court of the United States because I expect you'll have courts across the country ruling in very divergent ways. So ultimately, I expect it to reach the Supreme Court, and I don't know what they're going to do when it comes to an executive order. Two, even if the executive order does survive a court challenge, it's unlikely that we will elect Republican presidents from now until the end of time in the United States. So it's very easy to see a situation where the next president might repeal that executive order. So since that is something that is of importance to an overwhelming majority of the people in our state, this is a situation where we want to have belts and suspenders. Yes, we appreciate the protections coming from the federal level, but we also want to make sure in the event there's a shift at the federal level that we have state laws in place that will protect our citizens here.
Are there anything, and back on our government efficiency, is there anything right now that you see that you think is an inefficiency, or is this just precautionary to see if there are inefficiencies?
So I think the answer to that is both of those things are true. You know, we have 162 at the moment House members. I think probably every single one of us has experienced inefficiencies in state government. We certainly hear about it from our constituents all the time. So we all have different answers on what the exact inefficiencies are. So this gives us an opportunity to try and focus in on what are those efficiencies or inefficiencies that are the most egregious that perhaps we could help solve on behalf of our constituents here at the state level. Anything else? Okay, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.